Welcome back to the classroom, everyone. Look, when you step onto a job site and climb into the cab of a mobile crane, you are taking on a pretty massive, totally uncompromising responsibility. I mean, one wrong move, one miscalculated weight, or one missed hazard, and the stakes instantly, and I mean instantly, become a matter of life and death. And honestly, that is exactly why the CCO certification program is so rigorously designed. You aren't just taking some standard multiple-choice test, you're proving you actually have what it takes to keep yourself and everyone around you safe. So today, we're going to break down the exact knowledge you need to pass. Think of this explainer as your ultimate, highly structured curriculum blueprint. We're going to look exactly at what you need to know, how you need to think, and how to absolutely conquer the core examination. Okay, let's dive right into the actual DNA of this exam. The CSEO core exam tests your knowledge across 4 distinct areas, and the weight is distributed very intentionally. Site knowledge makes up about 20%. Then, operations takes up 26%. Next, technical knowledge requires a massive 28% of your focus. And finally, load charts round out the final 26% of the test. I highly recommend you just go ahead and memorize this breakdown. By knowing exactly where the test writers place their emphasis, you can be super strategic about your study time. Because you can't just be good at pulling levers, right? You have to master the full spectrum of crane knowledge. So here's your virtual syllabus for today. We're going to tackle this curriculum logically, moving chronologically through a job across our 4 domains. First, evaluating the ground in Domain 1. Second, executing the work in Domain 2. Third, mastering federal regulations in Domain 3. And finally, crunching the critical numbers in Domain 4.
All right, let's start right from the moment you arrive at the job, with Domain 1, Site, which again is 20% of your total exam score.
Never forget that a safe lift doesn't start when the load leaves the ground. Actually, scratch that. It starts before the outriggers even touch the dirt. A critical part of this domain is understanding every single element that affects ground stability. And the curriculum divides this up perfectly into what you can see and what you can't. You have to evaluate unseen, below-surface hazards, things like hidden voids, buried tanks, or loose fill. But you also have to spot on-surface hazards, like compromised retaining walls, slopes, or depressions. Look, if you position a boom without supporting materials, like mats or cribbing blocks to safely distribute that crane's weight, physics is going to take over, and trust me, gravity always wins.
But you know, site prep isn't just about the dirt. Your hazard identification skills must be hyper-aware of the entire environment around the machine. The exam requires you to know how to identify hazards concerning your basic access to the job site and in-transit clearances. More importantly, you've got to recognize pinch and crush points, actively track personnel moving around the site, and wow, this is a really big one, be acutely aware of electric power line hazards specifically during the assembly and disassembly of the crane. A massive percentage of crane fatalities happen during setup and teardown near power lines. It's absolutely crucial. You also need to know how to review these lift requirements with site supervision and understand the controlling entity's responsibilities.
Once the site is secured and the crane is built, you climb into the cab. So we move into Domain 2, Operations, which sits at 26% of your test requirements.
A major part of the operations domain is understanding your technology. Think of your operator aids as the crane's central nervous system. They are literally your first line of defense against a catastrophic failure. You're expected to know the use and function of the load moment indicator, the anti-two-block devices, boom angle indicators, wind indicators, and drum rotation indicators. But the curriculum doesn't just stop there. It also explicitly requires you to know the alternative operating procedures for when those operator aids inevitably malfunction. You have to know how to fly that machine safely, even when the computer goes totally dark.
Because things will go wrong, and the exam demands absolute emergency readiness. You just can't hesitate when disaster strikes. You have to know the exact step-by-step emergency procedures, like what are your immediate actions during an electric power line contact? What do you do during a sudden loss of stability? How do you react to a two-blocking incident, which, is where the hook block accidentally smashes right into the boom tip? Or an overloading situation? You really need to frame these requirements in your mind as immediate action-oriented steps that you must instantly take to save lives on the job site. Let's look at a specific definition straight from the curriculum requirements. Dynamic loading. You have to know the effects placed on a crane's operation resulting specifically from shock loading and moving loads. You really have to deeply understand how motion instantly changes crane physics. I mean, a static weight just sitting there on the ground, that is a totally different beast from a load swinging in the wind or a load that suddenly drops and catches. You also must understand the effect of side loading, backward stability limitations, and operating in various tricky weather conditions like high winds or extreme temperatures. Before we move on from operations, I firmly need to remind you of this curriculum mandate. You must know the operator's authority to stop operations. Ultimate safety authority rests with you alone in that seat. If it's not safe, you do not lift. Period. End of story. Furthermore, you need to know exactly how to shut down and properly secure the crane when leaving it unattended. Passing this exam requires adopting the mindset of absolute, unwavering responsibility.
All right, shifting gears, let's look at Domain 3, technical knowledge. This is where we make a rigorous shift from practical, hands-on operation into a deep mastery of federal regulations and hardware limits.
So why this number? Well, the crucial point here is that this 28% represents the largest, heaviest weighted single chunk of the entire certification. More than a quarter of your success relies entirely on your ability to memorize, understand, and apply some pretty complex technical standards. A major component here is the strict inspection regimen. You have to memorize the exact criteria for daily shift inspections, the deeper dives of monthly inspections, and those comprehensive teardowns required for the annuals. Crucially, you also need to know the proper procedural steps for notifying supervision of any inspection deficiencies you might find along the way.
This domain is going to test you super heavily on regulatory standards and hardware terminology. You have to know current federal regulations and industry standards intimately, specifically ASME B30.5 and OSHA 1926 Subpart CC. You also need to know the basic procedures for rigging devices like slings, shackles, and the softeners used to protect those slings from sharp edges. Plus, you've got to understand wire rope inside and out, the types, applications, replacement criteria, and proper maintenance. And you're tested on the proper use of hook blocks and the weighted overhaul balls that keep your lines taut. It's a lot of memorization, for sure, but this hardware knowledge is quite literally what keeps the crane standing upright.
Finally, we reach the very last step before any lift actually occurs. Domain 4, load charts. This closes out the remaining 26% of your test requirements, and it's basically where theory meets mathematics.
I want to pose this exact question to you right now because it is an explicit curriculum prompt. Can you demonstrate basic math skills without the use of a calculator? Because guess what? On test day, you will not have the luxury of a smartphone to save you. You must be able to perform these load calculations manually. You need to know the terminology necessary to even read a load chart, and you need to ensure the chart you're looking at is the appropriate one for the specific machine and application sitting right in front of you.
All these load chart components come together to mathematically guarantee that every single lift is safe. To master this section, you must know the difference between a capacity that is limited by stability versus one that's limited by structural factors. You've got to be able to fluently read the range diagram and the work area chart. And you have to understand exactly how parts of line, meaning the number of wire ropes supporting the load block, dictates your maximum safe working load. The load chart is basically your operational Bible. If you can't read it, you can't lift.
So let's pull all of this together. The CCO core exam curriculum rests on 4 unbreakable pillars. Master the site, command the operation, know the tech, calculate the load. If you can confidently navigate the ground you stand on, assert your authority over your operator aids, memorize the rigorous hardware regulations, and manually run the math for every lift, you're ready.
So now you have the ultimate curriculum blueprint. You know exactly what the exam demands and exactly where you need to focus your study time. But I really want to leave you with this final thought. Passing the test is just the beginning. The real question is, when you step out of that testing center and into the cab, are your skills actually sharp enough to bear the weight of a 100% safe job site tomorrow? The stakes are entirely real. So hit your textbooks hard, study with purpose, and prepare to prove your mastery. Good luck out there, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.